Hashem, it's such a huge blessing and privilege to be able to sing praises unto our God, to focus upon Him and be those that are of single mind. Well, we are a week away from Passover, the celebration of an event that changed history. We try to encourage people, believers, that this is your family history, no matter what your biological origin. You got a blood transfusion, the blood of Messiah, which unifies and brings us into communion with God. And so this is our family history together. We see that the plan of God has always been set in motion for communion with Him, fellowship with Him. And when our forefather and mother chose their will above God's, they broke that communion. Communion with God means that we're not our own anymore. And that song that we sang a couple of songs previous to the last one is one of my absolute favorite. The fear of God. The fear of God is to hate evil. It doesn't mean we hate people, but we fear God so that we don't want to do evil. We choose to wish to not to do evil. Father, help me. And it's this process of saying, not my will, God, but your will be done. Each day, every breath. And it's a process. Some days are better than others. Some days are easier than others. But it's in the struggle that we are purified. It's in the struggle that we are proven. And so the fathers say, no struggle, no salvation. Again, salvation is drawing ever close to God. Those who are righteous ascend to God through the working of His commandments, which is love. And those that slide back down the hill, like me, have to get up and dust myself off and keep climbing every day. If you would please turn over to the book of Genesis, chapter 50. We begin looking towards Passover. It's not just an event of the past. It's not something that we say, yeah, that was a great time back then. It's today. Pesach is a beautiful thing. Passover is a beautiful thing because it's about more than just an event of the past. It was pointing to something, but it was also looking to something that is personal for you and for me. So we see in Genesis that our people were in Egypt. And how did our people get to Egypt? Well, what was the vehicle by which? Okay, a famine. And so, okay, one was sent ahead. And let's say, who was that one that was sent to Egypt? Okay, our father Yosef. Did he go there saying, hey, Egypt, I'm here. Love me. Did he say that? He went kicking and screaming, so to speak. You see, God sometimes He has to kick us in the atzukas to get us moving. God knew that our father needed to be in Egypt for an appointed time and purpose. And you and I are also in this process. He's moving us through various things. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it hurts a lot. But He's positioning you and I for other things than just what we think about every day. Our jobs, our families, the stuff that we're responsible for. It's greater than that. You see, every single person, every single soul needs to come to the point at which they know that they're in Egypt in bondage and they need deliverance. And you come to them at that time. And not with, look at me, I'm awesome, I've been delivered. No, you come humbly to people, to souls who desperately need salvation, deliverance from the true Egypt, which is sin and bondage. And so when we look back at the stories of our fathers and mothers, it's not about a story of the past, it's about a reality that lives today. Amen? So in chapter 50, we see that Joseph, he who dies at this point? Jacob. Israel. He dies in there. It was his heart's desire to be reunited with his son Joseph, whom he thought was dead all these years. It says, then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and so physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were required for him, such as are the days required for those who are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned him for 70 days. Who mourned him? Egyptians. They loved our father, Jacob. And these were the seeds that were planted in Egypt by our people. It recognizes Jacob, or Israel, the man, but he was the patriarch who taught his sons. And they were just as broken and messed up as you and me. But Baruch Hashem, he uses broken and messed up people who conform themselves to him, who bow our hearts to him. And so in Egypt, there were those Egyptians that were touched by what was given as an example. So we see that at this point, just to kind of gain perspective, had Israel, the nation, received the Torah yet? No. Why? Well, Moses wasn't even born yet. So this is a time before the giving of the Torah, and yet there were principles and things that God himself imparted to a lineage of teachers, to our father Jacob, who then taught his sons. And they likewise would also teach. And so we see that while they were in Egypt, even before the giving of the Torah, there was these seeds that were planted of love for somebody who pointed past themselves to God. And that's what you and I are also called to do. We see that 70 days, that's like what? That's a lot of days, isn't it? It's like a little more than 2 months. You'll see repeating numbers, 40 and 70. I can't remember if we see it again in a second, but these things, the importance of those things that point us past, even just the words themselves. In verse 4 it says, when the days of mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, behold, I am dying. In my grave which I have dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks, and the herds they left behind in the land of Goshen. And there they went up with him, both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. And then they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with great and very solemn lamentation, and he observed 7 days of mourning for his father. When the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning of the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a deep mourning of the Egyptians, and therefore it was given the name Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. And so his sons did for him just as he had commanded, and his sons carried him back to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah, before Mamre, which Abraham had sought in the field of Ephron the Hittite as a property for the burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, and his brothers and all who went up with him to bury his father. So we see that a great procession of Egyptians went to honor the burial of our father, Jacob. And when we see that we're intertwined with Egypt, the Egyptians, the people, not the spiritual metaphor. Egypt is not evil any more than any other nation, but we're intertwined together with this. In fact, it says that in the prophets that there will be an altar in the land of Egypt to the one true God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, and so it has been. When our Lord was small and in danger, where did they go? To Egypt. Why? Because it was prophesied that Egypt would once again be a sanctuary for the chosen one, for the future king of Israel. And so we see that this is, again, a beautiful example. It says that when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and will actually repay us for the evil which we did to him. Have you ever had somebody? Have you ever thought about repaying somebody evil for the evil that they did to you? Have you ever wondered if someone would repay you for the evil that you have done? It's a natural human reaction. We see that in our lives, there are events that are beyond us, and they're not truly about us, but we play a part in this. That it's greater than just the event. You are part of a divine plan, as our father Joseph was. He didn't ask to go to Egypt, and you or I may not ask to go where it is that we are sent, but it's about doing the will of God and not our own. Amen? So they wonder this, our protector, i.e. our father, is dead. Now what's going to happen to us? Will Joseph unleash the full might that he has? He was second in command of Egypt. Great military force. He could have, by royal decree, executed his brothers for the evil they had done. But he had a choice. Our father, Joseph, did. It says, so they send a messenger to Joseph saying, before your father died, interesting, didn't say our father. They wanted to make it personal. It's your father. Oh, by the way, he had a message for you. Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers for their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespasses of the servant of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Do you think that those words changed Joseph's heart? Or had the work already been done in his life? He humbled himself, but he was also humbled. He was brought into poverty. He was brought into want. He was brought into prison. He was brought into a whole lot of things which, in the scheme of things, are not on your bucket list of fun things to do. But our father Joseph submitted himself to God in his will and walked through that difficult journey. And so you and I also likewise will walk through difficult times and periods, and we'll meet difficult people. Not like you and me, because we're pretty awesome, but difficult people out there, right? No, we are all part of this great process, the divine drama, which God is using every single soul that has submitted themselves to him through the covenant in Messiah as part of a drawing, a great gathering of hungry souls. It says that his brothers went before him. I skipped 18? Okay. It says his brothers also went and fell down before his face and said, behold, we are your servants. Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? He sure could have acted in the place of God. He had the power, but he didn't exercise it. Joseph and all the prophets are all examples of a sliver of a facet of Messiah himself. Yeshua said to Pilate, when Pilate said, I have the authority to free you or crucify you. And the king of the universe in human form stood before a ruler, an occupier of the nation, and said, you only have authority by which my Father gives to you. And you can't do anything unless God wills it. He says, I can call down thousands of angels that would crush. You think you're strong because you represent a nation who is in power at this time, Rome? But he didn't say the things as a way of expressing his authority, but simply demonstrating the humility that God is God, and you, Pilate, are not. Submit yourself to God. When Pilate said, what is truth? He left before he could have heard the answer. Because many people say, I want to know, but they don't follow through with it. We also have to follow through with our commitment and our covenant with God. So it says, and this is one of the most classic things, if you could remember this, memorize it, etch it in your mind, and may I do it so in mind. People do evil things, but it doesn't justify it, and it's wrong, but it will be used for the good of those who are called according to the purpose. There is evil and things that that will only accomplish evil unless the soul is submitted to God. And so we also have to be those that are seeking our Father, the face of our God. It says, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about, so this day to save many people alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Wow, that was above and beyond what they were probably expecting. They were probably expecting at least some retaliation. And he said, our father Joseph did, like God, I don't want your apologies. I want to love you. I want you to know that I'm a servant of God, and you too can also be a servant of our God. He says, you meant it for evil, and the people in our lives which do evil to us, and there is evil, but a heart that is submitted to God will find comfort in God's will be done, and will utilize and see that had not Joseph been sold, he would not have found himself in the place to provide deliverance for our people. And likewise, the difficult times that you and I have endured and will endure are to cultivate the fertile land of our hearts so that we too can be a garden in which to give the fruit of God to people in just everyday actions, speaking truth and life over them and not responding to them in our carnal nature, which is super hard, is it not? We see that again, that Joseph was the servant in which he bowed himself. Do you think Joseph went through his trials with ease? Being sold as a slave, moving from house to household, finding in prison, then being part of the household of Pharaoh. You think that was easy? Did he skate into what God had for him in the future? No, I'm sure he struggled just like you and I. And he wondered. He cried out to God. And did you think God spoke to him every minute? Well, yes, but our ears are dull and our hearts are hard. But as we humble ourselves, we begin to hear more clearly the constantly speaking voice of our God. Over to the book of Exodus. Exodus chapter 1 and verse 8. Our people multiplied. I mean, we had a good place to be. There wasn't a famine anymore. People went about their lives. They had families and businesses and did things in order to take care of those families. And it says that our people grew until it was pretty impressive, enough to worry when the new Pharaoh came into power. As always, there is a shift of power to someone else. The old Pharaoh loved Joseph and loved our people, and he provided a place for them. But the new Pharaoh is a different breed, as it were. It says that there arose a new king or new Pharaoh over Egypt who did not know Joseph and said to his people, "Look, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." Therefore it set taskmasters over them to afflict them with the burdens. They built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, and the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. Another principle, that through persecution, we flourish. Through persecution, wherever there's persecution right now in the world, I guarantee you the church is flourishing there. Why? Because those souls have said, we will not bow down to the gods of this earth or to you, government. we will worship the one true God, the God of Israel. And we flourish. An old saying is the blood of the martyrs is the seed that grows things. Someone who is willing to lay their lives down for the faith is that beautiful planting. Messiah says, unless you lose your life, and you and I are not called, all of us, to die in that way, but to lay down our lives for each other, for those around us, maybe for somebody you don't know. What will you sacrifice for the soul of another person? We see that, again, this was that the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and there was a dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor and made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and all manner of service in the field. And all their service in which they had made them serve was with rigor, or it was hard. It was hard labor, hard work. So when we shift the metaphor to being in bondage in Egypt, to being in bondage to this earth, to this world, what are the labors and the taskmasters that we or people endure today, being in the bondage?
The flesh, the world, the devil, all three of those are bondage.
Okay.
That we have to struggle against.
Okay.
Our own passions.
Yeah.
Passions within us.
What could be the taskmasters of the day?
Greed.
Anger.
Frustration. Lust.
Yeah.
Selfishness. Pride.
Yeah. And those are the things that we have to strive to break. Even we who have been delivered out of Egypt, still, and many times in things we struggle against, we say, but it was so much better back then, back there. But it's not. So we are struggling. It says that the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of which one was Shiphrah, and the name letter was, and I'm just going to go with Pua, because that sounds as good as I can go. Pua. And he said, what will you do, or when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, see them on the birth stools. If it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. Feared God. If the fear of God is to hate evil, and they feared God, they would not do evil, even though the government, the ruler, had said, I want you to do this. You're my agent, the king of Egypt said. I need you to do this for me. But they said, at least in their hearts, no, we do not serve the king of Egypt. We do not serve the prince of darkness. We serve the God of Israel. A midwife, what does a midwife do? What's the midwife's job? Birth in the babies. I think did we have midwives for all 4 children? A midwife is kind of like a temporary life coach, helping you through the confusion of the birth process. And then at the end, helping you to bring that child into this world safely. And you and I are like spiritual midwives in this world, helping others to give birth to true life, which is, of course, communion with God. Our interactions with somebody who doesn't know Messiah, or even somebody who does know Messiah, we're able to speak into people's lives. And the birth, spiritual birth, is of the highest and most sacred, because it's eternal. You and I are able to participate in this process for other people. And so the beauty of choosing what God desires and not what we hear, perhaps, from the world, can make the difference of life or death. It says in verse 18 that the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing? and save the male children alive. But the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. All right, good answer. For they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. So it was, because the midwives feared God, he provided households for them. Again, you and I, as spiritual midwives, facilitators, people that speak life and hope into people and help them in this process. Our household is waiting for us. Our place in the kingdom is waiting for us as we depart this life and arrive into the next. It is being prepared for us. We see that Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Now we come to the point of the birth of Moses. And when a man of the house of Levi, is his name Amram? Took a wife from the daughter of Levi. And what was Moses' mom's name? Yocheved? So when the woman, or we say Yocheved, conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. What do you think it meant by saying he was a beautiful child? I mean, isn't your child beautiful to you anyway? Truly. But there was something different about this one, and it says he was beautiful. What would that beauty have been? I mean, babies look like little, screaming old people sometimes, don't they? What was beautiful about this particular baby?
He had the fingerprint of God on him.
Amen. It says, there's a midrash that speaks of this particular event and moment. It says that Yocheved saw that he was good. And the rabbis allude to this pointing back to Genesis and creation. It says that God saw the light, and it was good. And so this was the first, perhaps, the occurrence of which this child marked by the fingerprint of God shone forth the light of God, as he did later, in the point at which he was in fellowship with God, that such that his body absorbed the light of God. It says that he was beautiful. The light shone from him. Beautiful. What makes a person beautiful is the likeness of God. The light of God, which comes from humbling ourselves before him and following his ways. And he extinguishes our darkness so that the bright light of God shines through us. It says our father Moses was like this at his birth. It says that she hid him for 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with a bit of asphalt and pitch and put the child in it and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister, whose name was Miriam, that's right, stood afar off to know what would be done to them. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the river. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. And his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from among the Hebrew women, so that she may nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to him, go. So that the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And as the child grew, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And so she called his name Moses, or Moshe, saying, because I have drawn him out of the water. It came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, and he went out to his brothers and looked at their burdens and saw the Egyptian beating Hebrew, one of his brethren. He looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And behold, when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And when he said to the one who did wrong, why are you striking your companion? He said to him, who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And so Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh had heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Was Moses right or wrong for killing the Egyptian? He was wrong. God says, I take life and give it away. Our father Moses, he made an error, he made a mistake. And yet, God used that mistake. It doesn't justify sin. It doesn't, when our mistakes, if we are submitted to him, God will use those things even for a purpose. Had Moses not killed that Egyptian, which again is a sin, he would not have been in the place in which he would have met God. He would not have received what God had for him. All things work together. Again, sin is not justified ever, and we must repent. But God uses even our mistakes for his purposes and plans. Moses goes to the land of Midian. It says that the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. God help him. And when they came and drew water, they filled the troughs to water their flocks, but the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So he comes and he's probably, like you and I sometimes, he's kind of disoriented, wondering what's next, God. I feel like I've messed up so much. I feel like I'm in the desert sometimes, God. But as we submit ourselves to God, we find that he's directing our steps. When we fall off of the path or wander off the path, he brings us back to the straight way. The highway of God leads to God. And the pathway is the means by which that we get there. So, this man who had grown up as so-called a prince of Egypt became exiled from it. And then he gets sent back to it. You and I, if we are his, have been exiled from this world. But he sends us back into it with a noble purpose. Amen? He doesn't say, okay, well, I brought you out of bondage. Now, everything's hunky-dory and life's going to be good. No, he says, okay, I brought you along and I'm teaching you and training you. I'm sending you back into the world. I send you out as sheep among wolves. But don't worry, I'm equipping you. And like our father Moses, we have to go through training. And some of the training occurs on the job, which is every day. And some of it is for a purpose later in our lives. How old was Moses roughly when he went back? Wow. Man, we're just getting started, right? No part of our lives is hopeless. We're never too old to be used by God. Amen. That's right. Thank you. Submit ourselves. Submit yourself to God and see what he does. May I begin to submit myself to God. The gold that aligns the inside of your heart and will be on your crown, the jewels that are there, that are being placed even as you and I live, will be aspects, kindness, kind deeds to people. Perhaps it's even fighting with ourselves to hold our tongues. Remember, silence is golden. These things of our events, the everyday, are playing into your history, your story, which will be played out and will be extolled by God. The righteous ones. It's something, it's a noble purpose to strive for each day. We see that Moses was brought to Ruel, or later he's called Jethro. it says that, then of course then we know that he married our mother Zipporah and became a part of something bigger. Who was one of Moses' counselors later in the story? Jethro, his father-in-law, yes, but definitely his brother. God used this man to speak into Moses' life with a super important principle, which I highly recommend. What was the principle that Jethro, probably many of them, but
You can't do it all.
you can't do it all yourself. You need people. We're not on this journey alone. Woe be unto the one that wanders away, for they shall be eaten by wolves. We're in this journey together. We're the nation, the community of Israel, not the single solitary person of Israel. Together, he guides us and keeps us. If you were to ask a Jew, are you a Jew alone? I could go with a joke with that, but I'm not going to do it. No, a Jew knows that they are part of a community. In fact, in traditional synagogues, you can't even pray unless there's how many? 10 people. No, we're in this together. We're the community. Over to Exodus chapter 12. It said, chapter 12 of Exodus, it says, Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be the beginning of months, and it shall also be the first month of the year to you. Speak to the congregation of Israel, and saying, On the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for the household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons, and according to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year, and you shall take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. So we see that this principle that God he instituted to our people was you had to take this small animal who was without blemish, perfect, so to speak. And you just didn't go, yeah, that's my lamb. You brought it into your house, to your household, and you cared for it. And you took care of it, knowing that what had to be done. And this innocent lamb would become a sacrifice. It says that you shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they shall eat it. We've done this example, and I don't think the camera will go that far, but if this was a doorway, that you mark the top of the doorway, called the lintel, and the two doorposts of the sides. Tradition says that the mark was the ancient tav, which was, if you were to look it up, it's the form of a cross. And there were 3 of them. And how many crosses were there on Golgotha? Yeah, how many crosses were there? 3. All the way back to this institution. We see a foreshadowing of the crucifixion of Messiah, the sacrifice. Baruch Hashem. All the way back, God leaves breadcrumbs in the scriptures all the way across for our people first, and then for the nations. And sometimes we forget the breadcrumbs. Doesn't matter how long you've been a believer. You have to keep eating the bread. You have to keep eating the manna every day, so that we don't forget, so that we don't become distracted. It says that in verse 8, that they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread, with bitter herbs, or herbs, as our UK friends like to say. they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw nor boiled with water, but roasted in fire with its head and its legs and its entrails. Yummy. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it you shall burn with fire. That's a pretty complete sacrifice, huh? It's consumed, or not consumed, but roasted in fire, and we partake of it, and then whatever's left has to be burned. Again, a picture of Messiah. And thus you shall eat it with a belt on your waist and sandals on your feet and staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste, for it is the Lord's Pesach, Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, against all the gods of Egypt. I will execute judgments. I am Yahweh. I am the I am. God is a God of mercy. The God of the Old Testament, the Tanakh, is the same God of the New Testament. He's a God of mercy, but he's also a God of accountability. There is no mercy without accountability. Accountability is guiding, drawing, pleading for us and for all human beings to come unto God. He says that he will pass judgment on the gods of Egypt. So each of the plagues that God sent was a judgment on one of the gods. There were probably more than 10 gods of Egypt, but I guess these were the big dogs. When God brought darkness upon Egypt, which god was he humbling? Ra, the god of light. Oh yeah, you worship the sun? Let me tell you what, middle of the day, bright sun, boom, darkness. I am the Lord, he says. The various plagues, the final one, you see, Pharaoh says, so it is said, I am the morning the morning star. I am God, Pharaoh says. I bring and give all things. And they believe that. And yet, at the very end of it, they died. So then kind of make up a nice myth about that too, that, all right, I'm God, and okay, you're going to be God, and then, oh, I'm dead. God is the only one who is God. And so he brought death upon the firstborn as a way to show that you think you're the God who brings life? I am the one who chooses and brings death if I choose and life if I choose, says our God. Each of the gods were humbling progressively the Egyptians until finally they said to the Israelites, would you leave already? Here, take this stuff, just leave. Every time that we submit ourselves to God and choose God over evil, we gain the abundance that comes with obeying him. For an action of righteousness, God dials up the light within us, and we become stronger and brighter and more able to be used by him. When we struggle, it's a part of the process. If there's not struggle, there is not drawing close to God. What's pretty common when somebody wins the lottery? I know they got to dinner, but what besides that?
Taxes.
Darn it, that's not it.
They stay anonymous.
Okay. What happens to that person?
It destroys them.
Okay, say it louder.
It destroys them.
Why? How could having a bunch of stuff destroy you? I mean, isn't that what we all want? Why do you think that freedom destroys people?
Because it blinds us from our reliance on God. We believe that we have all that we need and we can take care of ourselves.
Yes. Have you ever wondered why you struggle every day? Why we have to rely upon God? It's just mercy to us that we don't have everything, that we don't have unlimited money. Because we would eventually believe that we are God and we have no need of the God, and we would become worldly. It's that which keeps us close to the ground, our reliance upon God. It's the way of his people. And so he blesses us according to his will, but we all will struggle in this life. It's a part of the journey. We see that in verse 14 of chapter 12. It says, "On this day you shall keep it as a memorial. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations, and shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. Whoever eats leavened bread from the first day into the 7th month shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the 7th day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done, but that which every person must eat, that only may be prepared for you. So you observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this same day I brought your armies out from the land of Egypt, and therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance." Unleavened bread. Does God hate leavened bread? Oh no. I mean, heard of challah, right? Yummy. We look at symbols and signs and pictures to be able to look at something deeper than that. He said, clean your house. Remove the crumbs of leaven. And leaven is what? Sin. He says remove the crumbs of leaven and remove the chunks of leaven. This chunks doesn't sound very appetizing. He says to you and to me, you clean your house. My house, which is the heart of every soul. You clean this house of all the crumbs and the chunks of leaven. We have to get sin out. Because God's temple is holy unto him. He says it is more holy than the place in Jerusalem. Your heart is, and my heart. It's always been about making space for him and cleaning the dust and the dead things, and that's what dust is, right? I used to think as a child that dust was just a bunch of dirt that got brought in from outside. But as I got older and became dustier, dust is what? Dead skin cells, dead things. Have to remove those things from our hearts and make space for God. So we see that this is the purpose of Passover at that time was the next stage in our people's development. He called a nation of Israel out of the world, not because they were awesome, not because we are awesome, but because he has a plan for them to be instruments. And he has a plan for you and I to be instruments of his truth in this life and in those that we come into contact with. The Passover of that day, of that time, the first Pesach was to point to the Pesach, the Passover which would come in the form of Messiah. He is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. It is his body which gives us life, and his blood which purifies us. And that is the ultimate meaning of this, not about knocking the crumbs out of your toaster, finding that box of cornflakes that's been back there for a year. No, it's about this house of God. It's about pointing people to him. We're going to have a beautiful opportunity in a week to be able to host. And you are hosts. It's not about people that are assigned stuff. You are a host who will be sitting at a table to welcome brothers and sisters in Messiah from other places, other churches. And there's going to be people there that don't know him. And you're sitting at that table as a servant, as a host for our community, but ultimately for God. So I pray that he gives you the wisdom and the words to be able to speak life into someone. And each day may he keep us and teach us so that we can become truly the servants of God that he's called us to be. Amen. Hashem. Father, may you continue to guide us along the straight path and keep us. Father, Help us to remove the stones and obstacles from our hearts so that you can have a smooth path to travel down. Oh Lord, smooth the highway of my tongue that I can speak your words and not my own. May you bless us and keep us and bless the food that we're about to partake of as a community. May we give you thanks and glorify you in all things. We ask this in his name. Amen.